The Fallout 4 assault rifle, or by extension the Fallout TV show assault rifle, is certainly iconic, but my god, it looks horrible. Hello again and welcome back, Lead Instructor of the Spinosphere Training Group. If this is your first time here, we need to get some basic disclaimers out of the way. Now, in addition to on-the-range training and professional consultation services, we'll also do some consultation services for the entertainment industry, which means designing realistic and practical weapons. Now, I totally understand that in a video game, you don't necessarily want realism. Sometimes you want bombastic and extra, and that's perfectly fine. For example, things designed to be cool or interesting or for gameplay balance, it's going to be rule of cool or ROC. From here, we see lore justification or rule of lore. Oftentimes, if there's any real knowledge behind the lore writers and whoever's creating the item, they will justify it with some realistic considerations, but not always. Anywho, so an example of that, they actually made this original design to only be for the power armor wearing people. And if I'm not mistaken, it was actually insinuated to be a machine gun to begin with. So there can be some similarities between that original design and then it being forced into an application that it wasn't originally intended to be. However, in the end product, it was called an assault rifle. So we're gonna go by that justification. Now, an extremely important thing to remember about artistic design and things like that is creating the most practical and realistic thing can often be extremely boring. So we're not gonna be tilting this all the way into practicality and realism. We still wanna retain some of the original image. So, for our final design, we're gonna make sure that we implement that. Let's move on to the analysis of the Fallout 4 assault rifle. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at this assault rifle. Now, the model that we're looking at is going to be a little bit weird because I can't just grab this with the other hand and start shifting all around. It is attached to my right hand. So we're going to have a hard time taking a look at this. Not only that, but most dedicated VR games have some very specific tech that reduces the amount of jitter. Not much I can do to really deviate that. So let's overall take a look at what we've got. So we can see here on the muzzle end, I'm actually going to remove my grip here. We can see that the muzzle is very low in the axis here. It's not in the center of that jacketing, so which kind of implies that this might be a water-cooled design. And we can even see this tubing off the side that kind of implicates that as well. A little bit of a design off of like a Vickers gun, which have water jackets on them. We appear to have a grip underneath that allows us to have something to grip onto. This is a rather large grip, but not unreasonable. It also has a little bit of a mounting surface here, which is commonly something you would see like on a 249, but you know what, while we're on that, the hardest thing about getting a hold of this gun really early in the game was not at all the enemies or the travel, was the controls with the index. Like, these controllers are amazing, but in this game, where it's not programmed to use these controls, it's difficult. Simply grabbing the grip causes things to happen, as you see. So, this would be similarly somewhere that we would actually add some water in, if that were the case, but we're going to go over a little bit of that here in a minute. Well, you know what, while we're on it, this shouldn't be water cooled. The fact that fusion cores and things like that exist in this universe allows us to believe that there's very good heat mitigation technology in the universe, so we wouldn't need a water-cooled jacket like this. They even found out in World War I that this water cooling and the technology behind that was really hindering the development and the application of the light machine gun. As you can see, we have some fins here. These are common in other types of heat sink weaponry. And heat sinks are one of the things that we're going to assume could replace this whole water jacket. Moving on back, our trigger has a weird little flat face on it, which is odd. That would be really uncomfortable to shoot with. If you're in the heat of battle and you squeeze that too hard, you might end up cutting your finger. Or if the weapon is getting pried out of your hands, that can dig into your finger. Our grip overall is not horrible. No real issues there. We don't appear to have visible safety that we can just reach. Maybe that's what this little lever here is supposed to be, but it's not something easily reachable. As for our magazine on the side, go ahead and get it out of here. This is probably the worst part of the design. I can get over the thickness and density of the rest of this, but that magazine on the side is a really, really horrible thing. Because if you were to go to sling this, it's going to be against your chest, so more than likely it would rock like this. Very uncomfortable position. If you were to go put it on your back, now you have extra extremities that can be broken off or caught on things. Side magazine's got to go. That's going to be one of the most critical things that we remove right away. Second thing we're going to do is reduce some of this left-right bulk, and really just bulk overall. It doesn't need to exist. This is just in a 5.56 caliber. Again, if we're assuming the technology for heat mitigation exists, making like fusion cores a viable thing, this is not necessary, especially for the caliber that it's being claimed to be in. While we're on that, our sighting system, we can see that this is designed to be foldable, and it has verticality for adjustment as far as up, down. Unfortunately, that's not necessary, because if you put it down, it's now in line with this large ridge along the top, which is not really going to help us at all for aiming, because it's not a very fine aiming implement at all. Our front sight also appears to have some type of folding feature. This is a really delicate design for what's being asked of it. However, that little anti-aircraft design to it, which is what that partially is inspired by, this is really ineffective at getting a precise shot. Sure, it's put the bad guy in the center, but it's not really going to help all that much. Similarly, this rear sight with this weird rectangular shape to it is going to cause some issues for sight alignment. Our eyes are really good at putting things in the center of circles and symmetrical shapes. So making a weird square shape like this is adding complexity that doesn't really need to exist. So simplifying this sighting system is going to be a huge undertaking that we really need to engage with right away. Carry handle on the side, not really necessary. Well, it could be necessary with the amount of bulk that we're looking at overall, but it's not going to be necessary in the ending design, so we'll probably remove that. Our charging handle here. This has a this is a bit of a rotary action here. This deals with a lot of additional gear mechanisms. The thing that would make this a lot easier is just attaching this handle on the side of the bolt and pulling it back. This is a huge amount of added complexity that does not need to go away.
How about the settlement problem? Another settlement needs our help. I'll mark it on your map.
This is a huge amount of added complexity that does not need to exist. Our ejection port here, you can see we have a little bit of a dust cover. This is a little small for an ejection port, but it does at least have a cover on it that can help with that. But as far away from it is as the action, again, this barrel goes down the center of the weapon. Having it so far off to the right gives it extra time that casing could potentially jam up. Our stock here is very short. However, we do know from the weapons bench that this is an adjustable stock, so it can be pulled rearward. No major gripes with it, but I would want it extended if I am actually using it. But I did want to take a look at a fairly base model here. Let's take a look at a little bit of this performance here. Now, regardless if I have my hand out here or actually up, it's not going to change the accuracy because RPG elements. So we're going to see if we can take some shots here. Alright. So you can see we have good general purpose accuracy, very low recoil, which is consistent for this type of weapon. No real issues there. Let's go ahead and see this reload with a round in the chamber. Okay, so the only thing that happened was the magazine was inserted. We didn't need to charge it because we do have one in the chamber. Interestingly, it's at 30 and not 31. If we had a round in the chamber, it should be 31. The fact that it stays at 30 implies that this is open bolt. However, because it fires immediately on the pull of the trigger, instead of a very minor slight delay, it seems to be a little bit of a programming thing somewhere in gameplay, but that's one of the things to note. If you have an open bolt machine gun, then you would not get the +1 from a reload, but you would have a slight delay in the firing mechanism. So let's see if this changes based off of an empty mag reload. A very inconsistent fire rate. Okay. Alright, we still did not chamber it, so that's interesting. We have no bullet holes. That did give us a bullet hole. Let's take a look at that with the last 2 shots. I'm gonna assume I'm bracing here. No impacts to show. So interestingly, the marker is only if we're close enough for it. Interesting. Overall, this original design is one of the main things that really took me out of this game. So I'm going to design it into something that would be a little bit more practical. Just as a quick overview of the 2D dimensions of all the same things that we've already discussed in VR, we're going to review some of the vital components that we're going to be changing. Now, one thing I didn't point out was the role of an assault rifle. An assault rifle is a standard issue weapon of a military, force, faction, nation, whatever, and it's meant to fill a bunch of roles. Ideally, an assault rifle is kind of in the middle of whatever we need it to do. It's in the middle ground. It's able to perform a lot of things. Now, this is defined kind of as a power assault rifle. It's not terminology of today, but if we apply that to in-game lore, that could be meaning used with power armor. Unfortunately, whenever you create an entirely separate form of assault rifle, something for your standard infantry and something for your power armor, you've now increased complexity to a, well, twofold at least, by minimum. Just for materials acquisition and manufacturing, you really increased your logistics quite a bit. So ideally, if we can make this assault rifle usable for your standard infantry and the power armor guys, that would be the way to go. So our action, it was way too bulky in the original design. We need to do something there. And our barrel is very bulky. We are going to assume that the heat fins are going to stay in place in some degree, but again, with the existence of other technology in the universe, just like the fusion cores and even laser weaponry, which we'll touch on maybe at a later date if you guys vote for it, The heat mitigation properties in this universe are amazing. So the necessity for heat sinks and stuff in a standard assault rifle, which is not necessarily meant for suppressing fire, it's less than necessary. Muzzle device, we don't have one. Military service weapons, you want to at least have a flash hider for signature reduction. Suppressors are an option, but they do come with some downsides as well. So for a standard service weapon like this, we would want a flash hider. Magazine on the side, the dimensions of the magazine in game are actually close. They're fairly similar. However, it's a straight wall magazine. I don't have a straight magazine around me, but you can see here this magazine, this is also M556 and at the same capacity as the one in game. You can see it has a very slight curve to it. It's necessary because rounds have tapers. Anything beyond about 20 rounds to 25 rounds in a magazine for 5.56 needs to have a little bit of a curve to it. There becomes some severe reliability issues if it's not curved. So we're going to make a change. Our trigger has that weird little shoe on it. If you're wrapping your finger around or placing it on that trigger, it's only going to be comfortable for the point that it's in contact with. If it's slightly off, it's going to dig into your finger a little bit. So we need to make some changes there. Not to mention if you're in adverse conditions, if you're fighting for your weapon, it could potentially be leveraged out of your hand and cut into your finger. So that flat surface is unnecessary. Charging handle on the opposite side, that is an extreme amount of complexity for a simplistic weapon like this. We're going to simplify that. Grip, it's not horrible, but I do want to just raise this little section here just a little bit. I want to get a higher grip on the weapon if possible. But overall, not bad, not bad. Our stock, as we've already discussed, is adjustable. We're not going to make any changes there. We're going to assume that it just pulls out like it does on some of the modifications in game. So no changes made there. And our sighting system, this is very, very bad sighting system. You can see here if we draw a straight line from the center of the rear aperture through the front sight, that's a very high bore offset from the center of our bore. So we're going to have a lot of mechanical issues there, or mechanical offset issues there. Not to mention, if we were to lower this sight to, say, here, we've now just nullified this entire snag hazard. Just a lot of issues here. This could be more durable, more reliable, so we're going to make changes. With that said, let's take a look at those changes. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, anytime we do these, it reduces the original artistic interpretation and design, and it essentially makes it a much more boring version of an AR-15 or just a general purpose firearm. There's a reason modern firearms look the way that they do, because we found what works. And most firearms for about the past 20 to 40 years or so really are just kind of the same thing with very, very minor changes that change the ergonomics. The operation and actions are pretty much all the same. So let's take a look with all of those considerations. We're going to start from the front and work our way towards the back. So first off, you can see that we have a flash hider that has been integrated. No ports on the bottom. If you are low to the ground, this could potentially kick up dust if you're blasting gases out the bottom. So we'll blast our gases out the sides and the top only to reduce our overall signature. That is the purpose of a flash hider. So let's make sure we're not, nullifying that purpose. As we move rearward, we can see we reduced the overall jacket that existed here. For example, I can actually, so the blue line represents the height over bore issues that we did have, or the total height of the action and operation. And we've been able to reduce that significantly by just clamping things down. You'll also notice that we do keep some of this jacket in place. We're assuming this is where our gas is tapped off and returned to our action. So may as well keep it in place. Also, this is a certain example of, I don't want to flip these 100% into practicality and realism, because if I did, I would just create that. Anywho, we can see here by lining our barrel all the way down, we cycle directly into our action. We do have room for the gases to go back into the action as well. If this is a gas piston design or some other type of actuating design, there is room in the operating system for all of that to happen. We did keep some of the original heat sinking and venting in place, and it was a rather interesting thing, because let me just move back into my action real quick. Generally speaking, we want our ejection port to be directly over our action. The less movement that is required in the system, the easier it's going to function, and less issues it's going to create. However, with the extremely low recoil that we see with the gun in game, might be due to the 13 or so pounds of weight, it could also be assumed that it's a constant recoil design, meaning the bolt here never actually strikes the back of the receiver. If that is the case, then there is enough room in the action for that to be the case. There aren't many weapons that have constant recoil designs. We're going to assume this could be the case.
Let's dive right in.
Part of the reason I want to assume that, or part of the philosophy behind that, is this would allow us to have an ejection port that is slightly rearward of where the round is feeding into the chamber. Because the bolt has to go further to clear, may as well just have it eject slightly further back. It has to go that far anyway. Similarly, the ejection port is large and opened up here, so rounds can eject at any angle, and our charging handle can act as a brass deflector to make sure it's not hitting the 10% of lefties out there. Lefties, y'all need to fix yourself. Anyway, back onto our foregrip here. We didn't want to make any changes. This was a significant design to the original, so I didn't want to alter too much here, but I did want to clamp it in. I wanted to make it less tall overall, so we did exactly that. And we still have enough room to use this, in theory, mounting system here. For whatever in-lore justification there is, it still exists for that justification. Similarly, just for the iconic design, we kept this little rear swoop into it. Now, in addition to the action, one of the other big changes was the magazine placement. We did add the curving magazine, as we've already discussed, and we added a couple of different ways to change this around. Now, because it specifies that this is for power armor use, there need to be certain faculties for large suits of armor. Having big bulky gloves, there is a backstory to that if you see the other episodes, specifically the Halo episodes. Big bulky gloves can have a legitimate place in firearms design, but not always. It's not as critical of a factor as some people make it out to believe. However, the original ring here, this is a fairly small trigger guard. It's certainly adequate, but if we do have power armor suits and stuff in universe, we might want to just slightly enlarge it just for those guys. Similarly, we made our trigger slightly longer and flat face as well with a pivoting hinge point. There are different benefits to curved triggers or flat triggers, whatever. Ultimately, having this flat trigger just gives us a little bit of more leverage and room on that trigger to get more precise shots. So, just mostly a cosmetic change. We also added some controls here in the sense of this little lever actuation and our magazine release here at the bottom. Now, in most cases, I'm going to suggest a button mag release, similar to an AR. That little button right there. However, in this particular case, I don't want to get all of my controls too close together. I didn't notice a easily adjustable fire selector before, and normally I would make it a thumb selector, but because we have a large amount of action kind of in the way here, just went ahead and assumed that the fire selector, or at least at minimum a safety selector, is forward of the grip, so it can just be actuated by either moving it up and down, left or right, whatever the case. This does introduce potential issues with having your finger in a trigger guard whenever you're not necessarily ready to shoot, but depending on your training and manual of arms, you can actually make that work. Similar to how AK guys have to swipe their fire selectors down and then they establish a grip. They later created more efficient designs, but with the original, they had to swipe down, then establish grip. Similarly, having our mag release here and a larger exposed paddle allows even armored wearing guys to be able to grab this and then remove the magazine. Now, one of the cool things about paddle releases, it depends on your doctrine, but it requires you to maintain contact with the magazine. Obviously not a paddle release, but if we assume that I had one, I would have to come up and actuate that paddle, and then I'm already on the magazine, and now I can go stow this away wherever it needs to go. Similarly, one thing that you can do with paddle release magazines is you can just use your firing finger to push forward, and that would cause it to drop free as well. It really just depends on your manual of arms. There is enough room here for this one to be used in that way, but it's kind of under the assumption that you might be retaining your magazines either way. As cool as a fast reload is where you dump the magazine on the ground, the statistical likelihood of a fast reload being critical to survivability is very low in real life and very low in combat settings. So magazine retention from a logistic standpoint, I know I don't practice it that much, is a much smarter decision to go with, especially on a military context. Well, correction, military can just buy all the magazines they want, but you do you. That's the decision I made. Hate me. Moving on back, no major changes, as I mentioned, to the stock or any maybe takedown levers or anything, but our sighting system has been dramatically reduced here. You can see we lowered the overall height to, that's just along the top. The actual apertures and everything would be about to the middle there. Us lowering this sight or this height over bore gives us a little bit higher potential accuracy at closer ranges. There's less of an offset between our visual line of sight and the arc that the bullet's actually traveling in. So it gives us better overall accuracy. It's also less of a snag hazard, and our rear sight can still be folded down if necessary. There is enough clearance there to do just that. One other important thing is getting a cheek weld. One potential rationale for having these really, really high sights is the power armor guys can't get down on the weapon. So whenever you go to shoot, ideally you want to be able to get another point of contact on the cheek weld of that weapon, and then you're just looking straight to the sight. If you have a big bulky mask, you can't really get down on it. So having a higher optic in that particular case, or a line of sight in that particular case, could potentially make sense. However, I'm going to combat that with one specific thing. If you are sending out troopers in power armor with a significant resource and financial investment, you should probably give them something better than iron sights. And if you're going to give them something better than iron sights, it's probably going to have a big red dot above it that stands up over the iron sight. It makes sense to do it that way. But you know, I did not live through a Fallout event, so I don't know. This is part of the reason you'll actually see optics that are raised up really high. No, we're not wearing full-on power armor and huge bulky helmets per se, but whenever you're wearing night vision, I'll be back. Anyway, I'm gonna leave my cap on because I do have a window right in front of me and everything, and I'm not actually gonna turn it on. But when you're using night vision, it is A little bit difficult to get behind a weapon effectively because this line of sight through the tube is straight. If I'm slightly off axis like this, I can still technically see through the optic and see my red dot, but it's a little bit difficult. So one of the reasons that we raise our red dot sights up a little bit higher is so that we can get that more heads up shooting position and get behind the weapon a little easier. So that could be some justification for the original sighting system. That doesn't mean it's necessarily a good idea. Because, again, if that big snag hazard gets broken off, then it didn't really matter that you had it to begin with. With that said, we do know that there are optics in universe and options for additional aiming styles, so we're going to add some variation of a rail. I know that this is alternative universe with an entirely different branching arc of technology and justification to everything. The likelihood that a highly militarized universe would come to a similar conclusion of a universal mounting system is not zero. It's a lot like whenever we saw full-on rails in the early 2000s becoming much more common. There were several different companies that started branching into, say, key mod or M-lock systems, and there were a lot of different solutions that came onto the market. These are all examples of people trying to create a common solution. In the end, M-lock rails, such as this one here, kind of became the norm and the most accepted one. Keymod kind of fell away, and some of the other ones just kind of fell away because they just weren't as reliable or versatile as M-lock. All that just to say that the presence of a rail and the implications therein is not necessarily an unrealistic thing. It may not be in our interpretation of what a rail is, but seeing some type of universal mount like that is fairly reasonable. Either way, that is all I have for the assessment of the Fallout 4 assault rifle, or our assault rifle, or whatever we're going to call it today. All in all, this is a really fun look. I really hated the original design of this rifle, so I was really excited to see that we got the number of votes that we did on that particular weapon. With that said, be sure to look out for the next episode. I have a very, very long list of weapons to look at, and I'm really just guiding that based off of y'all's votes. So by all means, get in there. And please feel free to recommend some more. This is actually a lot of fun for me, and I look forward to doing these. And yeah, I'm very excited to see what we got coming on next. Thanks, guys.